So, welcome to Lake EVENDIM, or EVENDIM. I'm not sure which of the pronunciations is correct, but this is a custom map made by Sin of the Dark Cloud, I believe with the intention to use it for scenarios, but this is a standard battle where we were able to bring our own armies and deploy. I think that the deployment was meant to be across the whole bottom and top of the map, but it was sort of a bit more bunched, but I actually think that worked out for the better in the long run. And this is a civil war between two of the human factions, Arnor and Gondor, so I was playing on the Gondorian side. So let's go through the army compositions, and of course there will be links in the description for the Discord, for the ModDB page, and of course for the battle start. I've got a timestamp, and it is worth saying that this battle will probably be up on the official channel before it is up here, so if you want to go and watch it over there, please feel free. It's the same battle, it's just from two different perspectives, I suppose. So without further ado, let's get on to the army compositions, and first of all, my army. Gondor, when it comes to facing off against Arnor, they probably have the slight infantry advantage simply because of the diversity, whereas Arnor certainly have the cav and archer advantage by a bit more of a clear stretch. The artillery, of course, is exactly the same with the trebuchets. So I've got several units of spearmen, and usually I prefer infantry, but my thinking here, of course, was in case they bring a lot of cav, we want to try and lock them down with spears rather than infantry. A catapult, a couple of units of shielded fountain guard, again with a defensive theme, because I'm sort of bringing up the rear here, so I want to reinforce our line, if anything, and also Lasarnak nobles and Sons of Argonath for a bit more bite, obviously certainly attack focused units. And then I've got a couple of units of Gondor cavalry. They're very fragile, they're not fantastic to be honest with you, but they are quite cheap and they will give our cav force some numbers which we're going to need against Arnor. Their cav is much superior in some ways. So I also have a few units of Gondor archers, again nothing too special, but it allows me to field a skirmish force nonetheless. Gondor knights and general bodyguard, these two units of Gondor cav are pretty good. Their shortcoming against the really good cav units is they aren't effective against other cav units, which of course Arnor do have units which are. And then I've got a couple of units of the standard Citadel Guard. They aren't the Citadel Bodyguard, but they are still pretty good indeed. So now let's move on to my two allies, of which one is Saint Toady the Pacifist. And over here we have several units of Axemen, Shielded Fountain Guard, and Wardens of the White Tower. They are in a giant blob, so I don't know how many of them there are. I think there are three Axemen of Lasarnak, 3 Sons of Argonath, Jesus. There's also Shielded Fountain Guard in there, I believe 2 units. There's also the Wardens of the White Tower. I think that's it. There might be some Lasarnak nobles in there as well. Yes, there are. And then his General's Bodyguard is back over here as well. Oh no, this is Gondor Knights. His General's Bodyguard are in the centre over here. The armies do tend to blend together actually, so this is Joey's army. I'll just do their armies together because they are very close by. There's a Trebuchet, there's Sons of Argonath, there are Wardens of the White Tower, a few units of spears. He's mixed in some infantry as well, of course, because he's going to be the first one in, so he wants infantry effectiveness as well. A couple of Fountain Guard as well, standard Fountain Guard as opposed to the more defensive shield variant I have. Citadel Archers, another Trebuchet, some Gondor Militia, again a mix of spearmen and infantry, Gondor's Core. That will never change, it's very dependable. Athelian Rangers, they're fragile but they do a lot of damage. Some more Gondor Archers, a little bit more survivable but not great at range in terms of their damage. More Athelian Rangers, and then there's more standard Gondor Cavalry back here. So that is the Gondorians. Now let's have a look at the other Númenórean inheritance faction, Arnor. And they have, I know they've got several units of Hobbit Archers, Dunedain Rangers and Troll Slayers, which are all hidden, but Sin of the Dark Cloud, of course, he made the map. Anyone who plays 3rd Age, even back to standard 3rd Age, will recognise this name, of course. Arnorian Archers, they're not great, but they will allow a bit more volume in terms of the skirmish to go into Arnor's favour. They have several units of Dunedain Wardens. Again, their stats are not as good as several other higher tier units of Spearmen, but they do have hit points, which is a pretty important distinction. It means they're much tougher than you would think. Several units of Arthedain Man-at-Arms. These guys are pretty much on a par with Gondor Infantry. The differences between them are not that great. We also have the Trebuchets, of course. Trebuchets are going to be a big factor in this battle. Both factions have them. Both factions have them pointed at each other, and both are firing as soon as I click the unpause button. Few units of dismounted Dunedain Knights, of course. These guys, you know, we do have Wardens of the White Tower as well, so these guys are, again, very similar. Gondor and Arnor, of course, do have a lot of similarities. Battle Ready Dunedain as well, very good shock unit. Again, very skillful unit, the Battle Ready Dunedain. I don't think people give them enough credit for how good they actually are. Up here, if I just move along more quickly, we have some Arnor Knights and some Knights of Anúminas. Again, this unit is good versus cav, very tough. This unit could be a match winner simply because of how tough the Knights of Numenor are and how deadly they are. Gondor's cav is a little bit too focused on survivability. Then we have Hung Lo, who is another Arnor player, several units of militia, just bulking out his army with a few more numbers. Again, he's got several units of Dunedain Wardens, Arthur Dane Men-at-Arms, and some Arthur Dane Knights as well. So he's spent some to get this. You know, Arthur Dane Knights are really very, very good. Similar to the Sarnak Nobles, only probably slightly better. They don't have the effectiveness against armour or cav, but they are very good in a sustained melee. Trebuchet, Dunedain Bodyguard, again, you know, very strong units all round. More dismounted Dunedain Knights. Over here we have more battle-ready Dunedain, more Arnor Knights, and more Arthur Dane Men-at-Arms. And then the final player is Carandol, and he has 2 units of artillery, a catapult and a trebuchet. Those don't, well, they don't come cheap, but, you know, potentially a match winner, of course, as siege equipment always is. Dismounted Arthur Dane Knights again, battle-ready Dunedain. Arnorian Heavy Archers, he's the first player to have brought those. He also has some Arnor Pikemen, and he also has the Arnor Gate Guards, very scary pike unit. They're the only pike unit in the game as it stands to have hit points, I believe, which probably makes them the best. I haven't tested that, to be fair, but I'd be very surprised if the Imladris Guards were better than them, to be honest. More Arnorian Heavy Archers and a big cav force, including the Knights of Numenor, Arnor Knights, and some Arnor Sergeants back there. They're not great, but again, it's all about numbers. You can't have just quality on the field after all. And then we have dismounted Arthur Dane Knights and Arthur Dane Men-at-Arms. So without further ado, let us begin the battle. If I'm a little croaky, I do apologise, but that can't be helped. So the skirmish will begin, and as I've said, Arnor's archers are far superior to Gondor's, so they are certainly going to have the advantage in those terms. But there's not really much we can do about that. We can only hope that our siege helps us through, and we can only hope that when the infantry fight comes together, that the grind will suit us more than it will suit Arnor. And hopefully, again, this is where the bulk of the first force is going to go. And if we go over here, we can already see that one trebuchet has fallen to the enemy trebuchet. It's very unfortunate. But yes, this is where the bulk of the armies are going to meet. And on the other side of the lake over here, we can see that I'm going to be sending across forces over here as a little flanking force, and the enemy, we go across the lake over here, it's going to be doing the same. They're not moving at full speed yet, but there are 2 fords, so we're going to be meeting. That engagement is going to be smaller, but the winner of it will decide who has flanking privileges, essentially. I believe the idea eventually behind it is that this sort of island in the middle will be included, but as it stands, none of us are really going to be able to get over here to occupy it in time, simply because there's a lot of cav on the field, so our infantry is going to have a real problem in getting over there. I completely missed where that hit. But if we look over here, Toady has blobbed up his army a little bit, but it doesn't, you know, this hill is going to help us in the long run, but as it stands, how closely packed his armies are, oof. A direct hit on that Gondor militia. It is only militia, but it is still a direct hit, and another direct hit. The militia is going to lose stomach for the fight pretty quickly, but again, we are returning fire. And if we look over here, we can see that an Arnorian trebuchet has also fallen by the wayside, so it is 1 for 1 in terms of the siege kills so far. We shall see if that keeps up. Again, we have the Hobbit archers that have revealed themselves and are going forward first. Again, send in your lesser units first. It's the oldest tactic there is. Save your best for last. Again, if we see here, both factions have set up a pretty good defensive position. The Athelian Rangers have taken a few heavy losses, to be fair. But the stakes are going to make it difficult for the cav to get frontal charges on both sides. You know, over here there is a few gaps in the stakes, but really you'd have to be mental to try and charge cav into this many spearmen and the archer fire you'd have. So for the time being, the skirmish is real. Oof. This position on the hill, it is a nice one to have, but at this point in time it's actually working against us simply because of the amount of artillery fire we're taking. Arnor are a little bit more spread out, so it is a little bit more difficult for us to hit them, although we are having some success. Saw there a few units of Arthur Dane Men-at-Arms taking a direct hit from the trebuchet. It wasn't the full force, but it was still kills. Nothing's worse than when you bring siege and it doesn't get any kills at all. These Dunedain Wardens are going to be an interesting matchup to our spearmen. They have less armour, but they are better. That was a more direct hit. Unfortunately, it was only on Arnorian archers. But again, we can't afford to be picky. The Arnorian archers and militia always look so goofy with their like short shorts. It's not exactly battle attire. Again, keeping an eye on the mini-map, you can see that the 2 flanking forces are sort of just, you know, getting into position. I'm being a little bit more defensive because as Gondor you kind of have to. I mean, their focus is pretty heavily defensive, certainly more than Arnor's. And of course Arnor's Cav, so dangerous. Not as good as Dol Amroth's or Rohan's, but it's not far behind. The Knights of Numenor are that good. And again, another direct hit on that militia. They are getting absolutely hammered. Again, if we were going to choose a unit to be the artillery bait, it would be the militia, but even so, you can tell that the Arnorians are trying to kill the trebuchets. And of course I do have a catapult as well, but I'm bringing it up and I'm going to try and save that for later on, for when the trebuchets have expended all their ammo and the infantry is coming together. I'm going to try and get some kills with my catapult then. Meanwhile, if we look over here, it is very much a skirmish fight still. But it isn't worth cutting this, because if you look in the... all of the artillery action is pretty much now, and who doesn't like artillery? If we look over here though, 2 trebuchets have been lost for sin. But it's not the end of the world. I would say the enemy has certainly had more success than we've had. There's a lot more dead men on our side as it stands. Well, it is 2 and 2, but still, it's to be expected. There's not going to be a clear winner that becomes apparent early on in a battle of this size. Oof. And there goes another direct hit on Spearmen. Again, all of these tightly packed infantry units, it's too juicy a target to pass up for artillery, particularly trebuchets with their huge splash damage and huge range. Look at how far the trebuchet can shoot from. Again, they're not particularly accurate, but just the fact that there are 3 of them now from 2 in vanilla makes their chance to hit just that little bit higher. If we look over here, the Arnorian army is getting ready. The ranks are ready, but I think I will make a little cut. Well, actually, will I? We'll see over here. You can see Athelium Rangers pulling back. No, I think I will make a little cut, actually. Simply because the skirmish phase is still underway and it will go on for a little bit longer. And it's best if we really get into the meat of this battle. Because there is quite a long grind over here, and we want to get every bit of that grind. So I will meet you on the other side of the cut. So, as you can see, the artillery shots are still streaking past. The Hobbit archers have moved up, and I think now is a good time because Arnor will come pretty soon. These Hobbit archers, they've really been thrown to the wolves. And as you can see over here, it's a kind of interesting formation we've got going on. We've got a sort of block in the middle. We can see the arrows just absolutely streaking in. But again, against Gondor infantry, they can stand up to low tier archers pretty well. Gondor's shielded infantry is better than most. Really only the dwarves can say they have considerably better units. We can see a narrow miss on that trebuchet. I've also got several of my units back here in reserve, a lot of Gondor spearmen. They're in loose so that I don't get absolutely fucked by that artillery, because it is still in effect. As we can see over here though, an aggressive play by this Gondor cavalry. It's going to clatter in to these Hobbit archers. It's not a good day to be a Hobbit. 0 defense and taking a charge from cavalry in the 3rd Age Reforged. They are retreating. They're shaken. They haven't broken though, that's impressive. These Gondor infantry are running a little far away from the lines, as are these. They really don't want to get isolated against the Arnorians. But these Hobbit archers, if they stay in melee, they're going to break very, very quickly. There's a lot of arrows coming in on this Gondor cavalry though, and the Gondor cavalry does not have shields and it does not have hit points. I think they have decent armour, but it's not to the extent that it's going to help them against such a withering arrow storm. So Arnor is backing off, and I think again it might be time for a little cut, simply because again these little pockets of action are what happens until the Arnorians and the Gondorians both move forward a little bit and engage each other. It's mainly the Arnorians that attack, to be fair. You know, as would be expected. Gondor are a little bit more static, but we shall see when Arnor begin their main advance. So as we rejoin the battle, as you can see from the patches of burnt men, the Arnorian bombardment was not kind to us. They certainly had a more successful bombardment phase than we did. Again, this came from the fact that they were able to spread out their army a little bit better, and so, you know, we bore the brunt of it. And so, feeling emboldened by this, the Arnorians make their advance. As we can see, the Dunedain Wardens leading the way. They're going to be pretty good at taking arrow fire, to be honest. They're shielded, they've got hit points. They don't necessarily have the best armour, but the previous 2 points are still going to carry them through. And the Dunedain Wardens, you know, as spears, they're also going to make it a little bit more difficult for our cavalry to try a frontal assault on their infantry as it comes up. As we can see, the wardens are sort of setting up. These 2 units of Gondor infantry we've got out front are a little bit marooned, to be honest with you. They're a little bit too far away from the main army, and they're going to get themselves butchered if they're not careful. I suppose we're trying to keep them at arm's length to really try and hammer home some archer fire, but if we see over here, this 2nd unit of Gondor infantry is going to take a charge from Arnorian archers in melee, so this unit of infantry is going to hold pretty easily. The other one, on the other hand, is not. The trebuchet crew as well. The other one is actually getting double teamed by 2 Dunedain wardens and some Arthedain men-at-arms. They're actually going to fall away pretty quickly, but the Dunedain wardens are going straight for these Athelian rangers. That's a good target. The Athelian rangers pretty lethal at range, but in melee, not so great. My god, look at the corpses of some of them. They're going crazy. Well, death spasms, I suppose. But yes, the battle is now joined, although, to be fair, it is only joined with 2 Gondorian infantry units out front, but now more reinforcements are arriving, as is needed if we're going to hold this frontal position. These more units of Gondor infantry is coming forward, and they really need to, because the Gondor infantry, while it will slaughter Arnorian archers in melee pretty easily, while they're depleted like this, the Arthedain man-at-arms will have victory. While this is going on, just a quick update on over here. I've set up my defensive position with several units of cav, and I've also got a few units of archers and quite a lot of spears and all of my shock infantry over here. So I'm really ready to meet whatever the Arnorians bring, but that battle is for another time. As we can see from over here, I've also sent up 1 unit of Gondor archers, but it's actually getting focused down by a lot of the Gondorian archers. But over here it's a little bit of a mess. Our front line is a little too staggered, and it's allowing the Arnorians gaps to get in. If we look over here, these Arnorian men-at-arms are able to get through. This is not good for us. So these units of Gondor infantry, on this side we're doing significantly better because we have more mass of troops, but if we get flanked like this, it's not really going to matter. Again, Dunedain wardens, they're not intended to be an offensive unit, but getting rid of them is going to be a real pain, and by the time we do, our Gondor infantry is likely going to be gone, at least our first layer of defence. The trebuchet crew, the trebuchet is out of ammo, but they're going to get pretty well swamped by these Arthedain men-at-arms, and seeing the fact that our front line is kind of faltering, I'm sending forward all of my spearmen to sort of form up a secondary front line in case it falls. I was intending to use my troops as sort of more reserves, but needs must. So I'm going to form up near these stakes so that we're really protected against enemy cav. If we see up on this slope over here, my archers are firing. Our friendly cav is charging in, but it's not easy to get charges over these hills, and the Arthedain men-at-arms are standing firm and pushing forward. And we're never really going to win the skirmish when we've got troll slayers. We have been focusing down this unit, and we've killed a few. If we look over here, Dunedain rangers as well. We just don't have enough archers to deal with all of this expertise. And when it comes to range fighting, Arnor is just so superior to Gondor as it stands. Especially with the archers we brought. We didn't bring any veterans of Osgiliath, and we didn't bring any wardens of Minas Ithil, which could have evened the score a little bit. But hopefully our infantry will be enough to pull us through. This first line of infantry certainly won't, because it's getting overlapped all over the place. I think Joey really wanted to take the fight to the enemy, but unfortunately he didn't have enough troops to cover the whole width of this battlefield. And unfortunately the Arnorians are taking real advantage of that. This Gondor infantry is good, but it's not going to be good enough to deal with these sorts of numbers, particularly not when there are things like Dunedain wardens in there. If we look back there, there are battle-ready Dunedain coming in as well, so it's a pretty brutal first assault. And again, if we see back here, again, I'm trying to form up another shield wall with spearmen. This is going to be pretty difficult for them to break down, I think. Again, Joey sending in some more Gondor spearmen to try and save his faltering line. If we look over here, I believe some of Toady's men are being sent in as well. Yep, Gondor spearmen over on this flank. Again, Gondor militia. They took some really heavy hits from the trebuchet, something they really aren't designed to do. And if we see back here, there's a unit of pikemen, Carindol sent forward. They aren't really in position though. If we look over here though, the Arnor gate guards, they're really getting focused down by several units of citadel archers, and it just shows even with hit points, pikes still have a terrible weakness to archers, and they are getting absolutely hammered. So the gate guards, maybe not used to full effect, but ultimately our first line of defence is looking a little shaky. Over here we're doing significantly better on the lake side. Again, there's trebuchet crew and there's Dunedain rangers in melee, which Gondor infantry will hold against, but it's really over on this flank near the other hill that we're really struggling. We simply don't have the men, and we're getting flanked all over the place. If we look here up in close quarters, the brave Gondorians trying to hold, but ultimately against Against units of this caliber, they're not going to be able to. Maybe if it was just standard units that don't have hit points, but as it stands, definitely not. And up here we can see on the hill, there's Gondor Cavalry. There's also Dunedain Troll Slayers in melee. There's Arthedain Men-at-Arms slipping through the cracks of our line, which is not good. My archers, they had used up quite a lot of their ammo, to be fair, so I'm just keeping them in melee to try and hold back the Troll Slayers and the Arthedain Men-at-Arms, because we're getting flanked pretty seriously over here. Joey's cab really needs to get into them. I'm also committing the last of my reserves that were over here for the time being. The Shielded Fountain Guard, trying to help these Sons of Argonath. Now, Shielded Fountain Guard and Sons of Argonath will absolutely eviscerate Arthedain Men-at-Arms, but just the fact that we're having to commit more of our reserves this early is a bad sign for us. Again, if we go forward onto our front line over here, we can see that this part of the line is starting to falter. Again, Sin. Sin is a pretty aggressive player, and he knows how to play. And now we see over here, my spearmen are getting shot with arrows, but again, not terrible. They can stand up to the majority of simple archers, but we can see from the way they're dying, it's likely Dunedain Bodyguard that's shooting them, which they're less well equipped to deal with them. My line is ready to meet as soon as Joey's line is completely gone, and that is going to be pretty soon, it looks like. If we look over here, the Axemen of Lasarnak trying to get some flanking charges into these Dunedain Rangers. Their armour piercing is rather wasted on the Rangers, but they are still going to get their fair share of kills against such a light unit. Again, not very heavy duty Ranger units, not really used to the heavy lifting of infantry units, and over here we can see Gondor infantry. But if we look over here, the secondary battle is about to commence. Man, that was good timing. I'm getting used to this. So we have my cavalry going up against the Arnorian cavalry of Carandol, and really it depends on how we take this engagement, because really over on this flank it depends on who wins the cav engagement is going to win this flank. The Knights of Annúminas are going to be key, and I'm sending over my Gondor Knights to try and complete a surround, or at least a partial surround. I can't afford to dither too long with pikes around. If we look over here, the infantry is also going to make its advance. Arthedain Men-at-Arms and Arnorian Peacekeepers. However, they are going up against Citadel Guard, and my Citadel Guard are better than the units they've got over here. However, I do notice that against Knights of Annúminas, I'm not likely to win. So I'm going to send over my Lasarnak nobles to try and even the odds a little bit, or even tip them in my favour, because of course Lasarnak nobles are good against cav. They aren't the most durable shock infantry when compared to stuff like the Sons of Argonath, but just that extra little bit of bite might be just what we need over here. But we shall see. Again, the infantry fight is going to take place over here as well, slamming into the lines of the Citadel Guard. They will hold. They're not in shield wall. I didn't have time to micro them that bad. I was trying to focus on my cav, but they should still hold, and I do have archers over here, but so does the enemy, so it's going to be an interesting fight on this flank, I think. But if we go back over to the main line, we can see that the enemy is really starting to pour forwards. They've reached our secondary line. My spearmen in shield wall are now in melee. They're having to take on Dunedain Wardens as well. Again, Dunedain Wardens very much the better unit. Shielded Fountain Guard and Sons of Argonath up on this hillside, taking on Dunedain Troll Slayers, a full unit. I think with the amount of units we have, we should win. I love the look of the Shielded Fountain Guard. They're such an intimidating unit. Like, you wouldn't want to try and break through them. They're such a solid looking force. Up here we can see cav. We can see up here, right up here on this flank, we can see Dunedain Knights. So they're right up on that hillside. But again, these Troll Slayers, these Arthedain Men-at-Arms, on this hill we are halting them simply because we've committed our elites. But here in the centre, again, my spearmen, they will hold for quite a long time because they're in shield wall, but they're not going to get many kills, especially not when they're up against stuff like dismounted Arthedain Knights. I'm going to need reinforcements if I'm going to hold this line. Fortunately, Toady still has a lot of his units. They were hidden behind the hill in a big cluster, and he's sending forward his own Shielded Fountain Guard and his own Gondor infantry. But again, if we see here Dunedain Rangers, they're not going to get through my Gondor Spearmen. There's still some forces from Joey front and centre. I would have recommended, honestly, he pull back behind my shield wall instead of continuing to commit his men, because it was really a lost cause. But his Fountain Guard are still going to get a decent amount of kills, but ultimately they are going to be overwhelmed. If we look up on this hill, there's still some artillery being fired, and it is my catapult that I have sent forward. Again, if we look forward there, that was a nice hit, right into the middle of these Arthedain Men-at-Arms and dismounted Dunedain Knights. Hopefully that continues. We're going to need it, because over here we've taken severe losses. Let's go back over to the secondary fight, as it were. And if we look over here, the cav is kind of all over the place at this point. My Gondor cavalry is not very durable, but then neither is Arnor sergeants, so it's all good. And really it's just a game of cat and mouse. If we see over here, one of his cav units has escaped behind the lines, but it's not really going to do them any good if Lasarnak nobles are chasing after them. And hopefully they take the bait and charge into these Gondor archers, because honestly they're not that important. And then that will bog them down and give the axes a chance. I'm trying to reform my lines, but honestly the first engagement went well for me. If we look over here, underneath the cover of the trees, Knights of Numenor, only 22 left, so the Lasarnak nobles getting into melee really did tip the balance in my favour, because under normal circumstances these guys will mulch Gondor cavalry in a sustained melee. Again, if we look over here, he's trying to use his pikes, he's trying to get his pikes into a position where they can sort of trap my cav, and that is a concern, because like I use my Lasarnak nobles to tip the balance, you know, these guys really will tip the balance. My cav will absolutely melt before pikes. Again, though, we're just sort of squaring off against each other, trying to sort of gain the upper hand, and my elite infantry does give me a slight advantage over there. I do have quite a lot of nice shock infantry I can use. Again, the shield wall is holding over here. You know, shield wall is no joke. You know, the spearmen will lose this fight eventually, but as long as we can hold, it's not the end of the world. Over here, though, there is a gap again. Gondor archers in melee. You can see these Sons of Argonath at the back here. I've still got my shielded Fountain Guard. Victory is almost a certainty for them. What are they actually fighting? They're fighting more Troll Slayers. Honestly, not the most cost-effective use of their time. But again, when you're microing a battle like this, it doesn't really matter as long as you're winning a flank. But if we look up here, Dunedain Wardens, more shielded Fountain Guard are fighting off against them, and a sort of little minor skirmish over here. Dunedain Wardens not going to beat their more heavy-duty cousins. If we look over here, though, the Arnorians have fully forced us away from this flank. See all the like Arnorian peacekeepers that have fallen, though. Over here, this flank is looking slightly better for us. Slightly more secure. The shielded Fountain Guard are really holding the Arthedain man-at-arms easily. And now Gondor Citadel archers that are out of ammo are going into the backs of these Dunedain knights, and that should tip the balance in our favour, with the shielded Fountain Guard pinning them in. It's not the most deadly hammer and anvil, but it should still do the trick. And then we've got Wardens of the White Tower, Athelian Rangers that are out of ammo, Lasarnak nobles. We are holding, and that's the important thing. Considering the ruthless bombardment that we were put under early on, we can see just the wrecks of our siege equipment here and there. We are holding, the Arnorians being the aggressors. But that does play into our hands somewhat, again, with all our polearms, all our spears. Then we see the Arnor militia. Again, just giving them numbers, and that's the problem we have. We just see the Arnorians eager for battle. They still have reserves. And if we look over here, this is a real problem. They've managed to get cav in behind our lines. We do have some Gondor knights meeting the Arnorian knights and the Axemen of Lasarnak, but just the fact they're able to worm cavalry in through gaps like this, and now Knights of Numenor, this is a devastating sight to see, because the Knights of Numenor are a unit this healthy getting through, and there's not really much we can do about it. We can send our cav against it, sure, but they're going to lose. All we can do is try and delay. Now this fight over here, this secondary fight, becomes more important than ever because we need to win it. Now fortunately for us, we are winning it. You know, the enemy cav is basically all but dead now. You know, again, my Gondor knights cycle charging into the archers, really getting the upper hand now. Going to get some hammer and anvil into the back of these Arnorian peacekeepers. A lethal charge there. The Citadel Guard from the front have taken barely any losses. They're a very good spear unit. Basically a more heavily armoured version of the Dunedain Wardens. So, and if we see over here, we can see the flanking from the Sons of Argonath, and now the Lasarnak nobles are joining in as well. I'd used the Lasarnak nobles to swamp these pikes. They couldn't be used against my cav, and it did pay off. Ultimately, my standard Gondor cavalry did melt, so it's not a complete loss for the enemy over here. But I do have my two stronger units of cav still largely intact, and I do still have a large amount of infantry as well. So it's going to be very important that once we mop up the forces over here, that I retreat my infantry, use it to reinforce our lines, and then use my cav to flank around and hopefully get some forces. If we look at the percentages killed, we've fallen behind by 4%, but that's not an insurmountable amount. So we look back over here. My shield wall is still holding, but unfortunately it's taking rear charges now from Knights of Numenor, so that isn't likely to be the case for much longer, particularly not when they're taking casualties from the front as well from these Arthedain knights. And again, Dunedain Rangers, not really the biggest concern. Just the sheer number of these Arnor militia though pushing in But we do have Fountain Guard from Joey, sort of making it a little bit more difficult for the Armor Militia to just force their way through. My Shielded Fountain Guard have taken quite a lot of losses against, honestly, pretty damn impressive units, these Troll Slayers, but ultimately we should still win on this flank, and that's the most important thing. And these dismounted Dunedain Knights have also fallen to the Shielded Fountain Guard. Really one of Gondor's most effective units, the Fountain Guard, particularly the shielded variant, I find. Just the sheer amount of defensive, the amount of points they have in defense is just unreal. My catapult is largely out of ammo, and honestly, aside from the hits we saw, it didn't get too many hits. But it is actually taking, it is acting as a beacon for the enemy cav, so hopefully we can deal with this cav. But this unit of Knights of Illuminus from Sin of the Dark Cloud is really the problem at this point, because it's so durable and we don't really have an answer to it. And again, charging into the back of these archers. Look over here, Toady's army is still largely holding, to be honest. It's a lot more of a condensed fight over here. And if we look over here, he has managed to slightly surround the Arnorians over here, and he's going for a bit more of a surround with these Wardens of the White Tower. So it's going to be tense, but over here we're doing slightly better than we are in the centre and on the other hill. My shield wall is still holding though. I am pretty impressed with that, to be honest. Considering they're up against much better units, I would have thought that by now the casualties would start to tell, and honestly, if this hammer and anvil keeps up, it will. Now if we look back over here, the battle has concluded and I was victorious, mainly because I did commit more elites over here. It must be said, I'm not going to claim that it was my skill that won me this fight, no. I did commit some very heavy duty infantry over here because I felt like winning this flank would be important in the long run, and it might well prove to be. I did lose a lot of cav, but so did the Arnorians. So hopefully this will prove to be decisive, because I've got Lasarnak Nobles still, I've got Sons of Argonath still, I've got Gondor Archers still, although they're not particularly impressive, and Citadel Guard. If we look over here, we can see that my General's Bodyguard and my Gondor Knights, I'm going to try and flank all the way around like the Arnorians were trying to do. It's going to take me quite a while to get in though, but we need that cav relief pretty soon. My Spearmen won't hold for much longer, to be honest, although we are actually starting to wrap around over here with the help of Joey's Archers and his Fountain Guard. But this, the centre of our line is looking a little bit thin on the ground against these Arthedain Knights. But we are actually starting to pull it back in terms of the infantry, but the real problem is this cav. These Knights of Illuminus, and we don't have much ranged to deal with them. If we brought maybe a unit of javelins and concealed them, getting a few good volleys into them, but it's really heartbreaking to see when you can do nothing against a hammer and anvil like this. Although that wasn't the most effective charge, to be fair. If we look up on the hill over here, my Shielded Fountain Guard, defeat seems a certainty for some, victory for others, so ultimately against all of these very high tier Arnorian archers like Troll Slayers and Dunedain Bodyguard, they are essentially high tier melee units as well. So the Shielded Fountain Guard performing a real service by trying to kill them, but these Dunedain Bodyguards still have ammunition, so the Sons of Argonath even are struggling against them. Those Arnorian archers, man, they're so strong. The Knights of Illuminus are starting to take some attritional casualties, because of course they are charging into spears, and just charging into units over and over again will eventually lead to them losing out in terms of their numbers, but ultimately the charges are being more costly against us. And these Dunedain Troll Slayers are starting to wrap around my shield wall. Very bad news. My Spearmen, attrition is starting to tell, to be honest with you. Unit of 64, unit of 48, 67. It's not going to hold much longer, and we need it to hold for longer so that we can win on the flanks. Over here we're actually doing pretty damn well. We can see the Shielded Fountain Guard are pinning this mass of units in place, and 2 units of Wardens of the White Tower are trying to close the jaws. It's not being made easy for us, but we are slightly winning on this flank, but on the other flank those archers have managed to just lay down such a hurting on us. Even though we are technically winning because of the Shielded Fountain Guard, it's going to be difficult. The Arnorian bombardment early on and their skirmish advantages, they've used it well. But having said that, Gondor have shown their worth as well, because the shield wall, the secondary shield wall that I set up, and then the reinforcements that I was afforded by the slightly more heavy duty Fountain Guard that Joey provided, it goes to show that even against elite Arnorian infantry, which were thrown against them, they can hold. And they can hold for a long time, which they have needed to, because if they broke, we'd have lost already. There goes one of our generals. I believe that was Joey's. I don't think it was Toady's. These Knights of Illuminus, man. This is going to be a brutal charge. They managed to get up to charge speed, lances down into the backs of these spears. Again, maybe not the most lethal charge. Again, spears will turn around and they will do some damage, but ultimately only 30 left against battle-ready Dunedain and Dunedain Knights. They're going to fall by the wayside. These are simple men against men who are trained for battle all their lives. Bad news bears for us. If we look over here, honestly over here we're doing much better, although the Dunedain bodyguard now flanking around both sides is probably going to cause this flank to start dying as well, because the Fountain Guard have been in melee for quite a long time. Their hit points will be gone and they're being charged in the back by the Dunedain bodyguard, of course. The steel bows were their old name. Look at those swords. They look cool. I do like the Arnorians. Up here, my shielded Fountain Guard are winning, but it's a slow process. You can see all of the routing troops in the background, but my infantry is slowly but surely making its way up, but we need it up here now, really. But I'm running them up, but that means they're going to be exhausted when they get here. But we just need we need the numbers to hold, to be honest, at this point. These Troll Slayers going into the side. My shield wall is finally crumbling, but it did its job, to be fair. I can't ask much more of it. I thought it would fall earlier against such sustained pressure. Dismounted Arthedain Knights first, and then being backed up by battle-ready Dunedain and Dunedain Knights. Just lethal. Over here, though, with the help of the Fountain Guard, we are still holding. Defeat may seem certain, but we aren't going to run just yet. Really, over here, this pocket of resistance is the important thing. We still have elites over here. But if we look over here, we can see my cavalry is arriving, and there is a unit of Hobbit archers that's just sort of out in the middle of nowhere, so I'm going to charge into them with my general's bodyguard. Again, units didn't go flying, but they're already routing. Poor Hobbits and Gondor Knights. So my cav is going to be key, but as has been said, it's also going to be worth noting that manoeuvring them around in this minefield of stakes is going to be an interesting bit of gameplay. So I'm going to charge in here with my Gondor Knights, trying to get a frontal charge on these dismounted Dunedain Knights and battle-ready Dunedain. I need to get them out of there quickly, though, because there's so many men that I need to cycle charge to really make up the numbers. And the problem is the enemy still has cavalry running around. We see this Knights of Numenor unit. There may only be 28 of them, but they are so much better than my cav. And my cav has lost all its hit points, of course, from its earlier endeavours, because it did have to go up against the Knights of Numenor unit before from Carandol. And that was a real problem, and here we can just see the amount of Arnorian infantry they have left is going to be a problem, and my infantry needs to get forward here quickly. But it's the Arnorian elites that are left, and that's the scary thing. The Arnorian elites are not to be taken lightly. Just trying to cycle charge my Gondor Knights and General's Bodyguard against infantry. They will do well, as long as it isn't sort of axed infantry. The Troll Slayers in melee should do pretty well against my cav, to be honest with you, and if we see... I'm kind of being zoned out and I'm having to avoid the stakes, and if we see over here, the Knights of Numenor are coming out to meet my cav. Charging from the front with Gondor Knights, and my General's Bodyguard, I was a little slow to react with them. I wanted to surround them, then maybe the Knights of Numenor would have, well, we'd have more of a chance, but if you can see, victory seems certain. It almost immediately flicked. But I am actually trying to charge the infantry with my General's Bodyguard. My General is back there with his black cape. There he is. The brave Gondorians, we are at a bit of a disadvantage. Actually, no. No, we are. Yes, we are. So we have 90% of our forces killed, 88% of the enemies killed. It's still very close because, of course, my infantry is arriving and my Lasarnak nobles are coming over here to try and get into these Dunedain Bodyguard. These Dunedain Bodyguard should have their hit points sort of largely destroyed, to be honest with you. My Shielded Fountain Guard up on this hill are winning. It's a very slow slog for them, but they are winning, so all is not lost for us yet. As we can see, these Lasarnak nobles, again, they're not the most durable when compared to a lot of the Arnorian units that are left, but they do a lot of damage, and if I can get them into the Knights of Numenor, they're good against cav. Of course, getting them into the Knights of Numenor without getting charged is a challenge all of its own. Just look at these Knights of Numenor. I've only managed to kill one of them, and they've managed to do a number on my Gondor Knights. Look at them all bloodied up. The Lancers of the Knights of Numenor, giving them that ability to just mow down enemy cav. One of the best cav units in the game, in my opinion. If we look over here, the Wardens of the White Tower are making their brave last stand. I wasn't able to reinforce them quickly enough, really. We can see over here my archers are trying to pour onto the hill, trying to get... I do have a bit of ammunition left, and that may well be key. My Citadel Guard is also running in. Their hit points are also largely expended, but again, they're still a very durable spear unit. If we look over here, the Dunedain Bodyguard are retreating because they don't fancy this fight, particularly not when the Shielded Fountain Guard are about to join. So the Lasarnak Nobles did win this flank for us, and that is going to be key. I do love the Lasarnak Nobles in terms of their look. Those mighty axes. They aren't maybe quite as good as their armour would suggest, but they are still a very, very nice unit to use. Meanwhile, if we look over here, the Lasarnak Nobles, I sent them over here to just try and deal with these Troll Slayers once and for all, because we need these Shielded Fountain Guard freed up so we can try and deal with this unit, this Knights of Anuminos unit. So devastating, the Knights of Anuminos. They really give Arnor that... It's really they on their own give Arnor a good cav force. It's a similar story with the Earls of Dale, but even more so with the Knights of Anuminos. Again, the Arnor cav force is not quite as good as Dol Amroth's or Rohan's, but it's pretty darn close, to be honest with you. There's, you know, the robustness of their cav, shall we say, and when you team it with their archers, it's pretty lethal. If we look up here, these Dunedain Rangers in melee against my Gondor archers. Gondor archers' victory seems certain. Well, balance of forces is even. I have more archers up on the hill than they do. And unfortunately, we see here Knights of Anuminos charging into my other unit of Gondor archers again. I do have several units lagging behind somewhat. This Sons of Argonath. Where are the other units that I had? So the Lasarnak Nobles. So this patch of resistance is cleared up, and now we will have another unit of infantry. I also sent in, I believe, my Citadel Guard over here and some Lasarnak Nobles that I had left over. But Citadel Guard, you know, there are more of them than the dismounted Dunedain Knights, and hit points, they've largely been bled from both sides at this point. But it's going to be a problem. I mean, here in the late game, the Arnorians just have more bite than the Gondorians. I mean, I do have cav. I'm trying my best to charge into these knights. There goes the enemy general at the hands of the Lasarnak Nobles, trying to charge into these Arthedain men-at-arms. We need to get rid of some of the numbers that they have available to them. Dunedain Bodyguard as well from hung low. Again, my general's bodyguard, it's a matter of trying to dodge these stakes as well. If I ran my cav through stakes, it really would be game over. And again, Sin with these Knights of Anuminos charging into the backs of my Citadel Guard and my Lasarnak Nobles. If they stay in melee, honestly, it's not great for them. Citadel Guard, of course, spears. In prolonged melee, a robust unit like this is going to take its toll on the Knights. But if we look over here, the relief force is on the way. The Shielded Fountain Guard, I'm trying to sort of run one unit through, and then we've dealt with all the resistance here, so I'm going to just try my best to pin down these Knights of Anuminos. If we can get rid of these Knights, my cav will have free reign, and then we can cycle charge the enemy as much as we need to, and that should grant us victory. Mobility in the late game is king, but really these Knights of Anuminos are so tough, and that effectiveness against cav, like my bodyguard is not looking so great. They don't have many more, and I'm trying to get a charge off, and I will get that charge off. Well, it's a glancing charge. Ugh, that wraparound though. The Sons of Argonath, not able to get into melee. I do have a lot of them left, and they may well prove to be absolutely essential. If we look back over here, I do still have some Gondor Knights, although they're dangerously close to some battle-ready Dunedain. If we look over here, my Lasarnak Nobles, I'm trying to charge them into the side. Trying to get the surround off, because we're going to need it. The Lasarnak Nobles, one of the units of genuine offensive capability that Gondor have, and I'm very glad to have so many of them here in the late game. Ripping their way through the old Trebuchet crew like they weren't even there. But unfortunately, I took a charge in the back on those Citadel Guard, and I'm just not able to keep up with these Knights of Anuminos. Again, Sin. Facing off against Sin when he's got cav at his disposal is... it's not a fun time. But if we look back over here, I'm getting more of my Shielded Fountain Guard into the melee because we do need it. My Citadel Guard are now starting to really feel the effects of the Arthedain Knights and the Dunedain Knights in melee. Look at this. Close up. Brother against brother. I assume this is after the War of the Ring, long after the War of the Ring, and now it's just a case of which kingdom of man will rule over Middle-earth. I know technically Arnor and Gondor are like the same, kind of. But like, you know what I mean. Which banner will be lifted over the White City? Will it be the one of Arnor or Gondor? Honestly, it's very, very even. If we look here, you know, a 3% difference, but it is slightly starting to get away from us. We do still have Wardens of the White Tower up on the hill, but ultimately my Cav is sort of wedged in against his infantry, which is not great. I'm still chasing down these Knights of Illuminus with my Gondor Knights. I just want them pinned and out of the fight at this point. But look at this bullshit. They're just running away. And even when they turn around in melee, they butcher my Knights. The Wardens of the White Tower trying to do their best to get into melee as well. But the infantry fight is turning against us. They had so many dismounted Dunedain Knights left. And honestly, my Lasarnak Nobles, they took a rear charge and now it's not looking great. My Shielded Fountain Guard as well, they were in melee for so long against really good units that despite the fact they won, they're now falling by the wayside. And really, in terms of the infantry fight, it comes down to one key unit that I have, which are my Sons of Argonath. I still have 64 of them. That's not going to be an easy ask for the Arnorians, I should say, to deal with, but we shall see. Look at this though, it's a really close fight. If we look back over here, these dismounted Dunedain Knights, it's a really meek charge from my general. My general is still alive though, which is probably giving my troops the courage they need to continue the fight. But if we look, there are still Knights of Illuminus, there are still 10 of them, trying to get my Gondor Knights into them, just trying so desperately to pin them down, because these Knights of Illuminus, if they rear charge my men, it's pretty much over. Like, we're already losing the infantry fight. I need my cav to be freed up to charge into the back. And I'm trying to charge into the back with my general, but charging over this hill, it really, you know, the hill is protecting them rather, because you would think charging downhill would grant them a bonus, but the problem is charging up and over, it makes it slow and staggered. And my cav is also exhausted at this point. There are still Wardens of the White Tower in melee, that's impressive. My Shielded Fountain Guard, there are still 27 of them remaining. But there are just too few. We don't have the numbers anymore, and the battle it's still only 3%, but it's 3% against us, and here in the late game, it's not going to be easy to make up. The cav needs to be the kingmaker here, and unfortunately, Sin, there goes St. Toady. His general falls in the Wardens of the White Tower unit. He died on foot in melee, like a true warrior should. But just, it's so heartbreaking to see your units just overrun. And if my cav was able to break free of the accursed Knights of Illuminus, we have managed to cut them down to size, but ultimately it was too late. Like, at this point, the enemy has got the infantry advantage to such an extent that my depleted units of cav don't have the mass to get really meaty charges off. And I did try to get some good charges off, and early on I did, but just look at the lines. Like, you can see where my shield wall used to be. You can see where the first line of defense was. It sort of staggered here, and then there was a gap where this gap here, the Arnorians really made us pay for this gap. They were able to flank in and around. There was also gaps up on this hill which they managed to worm their cavalry in and behind, but there's just so many dead bodies as well. Again, I decided here to just try and really swamp the Knights of Illuminus. At this point I would settle for just having all of them dead. I would count that as a moral victory at this point, because it's not looking like we're going to win this. Like, I've only got 29 Sons of Argonath remaining, and they were really the last hope for me in melee. I still have a few Shielded Fountain Guards, but when it's like this, when the battle turns more chaotic, the spears are not really the thing you want. You want more down and dirty units like the Arthedain Knights. There are still Arthedain Knights. They're a cool looking unit as well. Looks like they're wielding Narsil. At least copies of Narsil. There goes the enemy general. That was Sin's general, I believe. So there's a slight moral victory for us. My general is still alive, and where is he? Can we locate him? That is the question. They're the Gondor Knights. Where is my general? There he is. He still lives, and he's not bloodied either. Again, I'm going to try and charge into those Knights of Illuminus. They're still there. Again, this is what I was saying early on with Gondor's cavalry problem. They're good against infantry, very survivable, very tough, but as soon as it turns into a cavalry versus cavalry fight, well, something like the Knights of Illuminus will pretty much stonewall you if they're used correctly. And really the only reason I was able to beat them on the other flank is that I was able to get Lasarnak nobles in and amongst them to really do some damage. And if we look over here, Troll Slayers. The battle is really starting to wind down now. There are still a few Sons of Argonath in melee. Still a few Shielded Fountain Guards, but it is very close. I mean, this is the sum total of their infantry that remains. Well, actually no, there is a dismounted Dunedain Knights over here, and there is of course the Knights of Illuminus, which still refuse to die. So I'm going to charge in. Again, all the cav is just exhausted again. There's another kill though. I'm trying our best to just kill that cav, of course. You see all the crispy corpses as well from the artillery bombardment early on. And the artillery bombardment, I believe after that the difference was 3%. So the way that Arnor was able to use their artillery to kill our more tightly packed units ultimately turned out to be what swung the scales in their favour. Obviously, I think really the main thing was how they were able to find gaps in our first line, and it was able to really make them cut our infantry down to size, but yeah. So we look back over here. This is really where the battle really starts to wind down, because of course, not really a great deal of men left in melee. There are still a few Sons of Argonath, I believe, just sort of right in the middle of this sort of... Well, there he is. There he is, the one Son of Argonath remaining. He is a pilgrim in an unholy land, as they say. Again, Dunedain bodyguards. So at this point, I do retreat once more, but at this point I am going to charge in for the last hurrah, as it were. I'm going to charge my general in, and he is going to die by the sword. There are still Knights of Illuminus. There are still 3 of them. So devastating. But if we look back over here, interestingly enough, we can see that Son of Argonath managed to survive. And he is having a mighty duel against the Troll Slayer. Who will be victorious here? He's bloodied, so he should lose this, really. But we shall see. Look at this. What a mighty duel amongst the corpses of their comrades. Both of them are now bloodied. I do think that the healthy one of the Sons of Argonath... Oh, he's running. He flees. But if we look back over here, of course, this is where I commit my forces, and this is it, the last stand. We are resigned to our fate. Victory will be Arnor's this day, and their banners will hang high over Middle-earth. And Gondor will fade into memory. But the important thing, of course, is that the orcs are nowhere to be seen. There's my general, doing his best, but you know, he's not going to be able to swing the tide of battle alone. Neath Ammon Hen, I heard their cry. Although this is Lake... I actually completely forget the name of the lake now. How unprofessional of me. He's doing his best. Bless him. Look at this. There's still a Knight of Illuminus left. Will he die? It's not looking like it. Because my general is the only thing left, and that knight is still alive, so I was not able to even slay all of Sin's cav. So bragging rights are very much his this day. If we look back over here, yeah, there goes my general. Interestingly enough though, that's not completely the end of the fight, because if we look over here, the Son of Argonath caught up, and he will not retreat from the fight. He died almost immediately, but he wants to die on the field with his comrades. And that is it. That is the end. But look at all the bloodied soldiers. Arnor were made to pay for it. So yeah, the kills. Sin, MVP, as he often is when he has cavalry at his disposal, I've noticed. But yes, I do think Joey got a lot of kills. Again, I think the bombardment was key. They were able to get their value for money out of their trebuchet a bit easier than we were, and they were able to find gaps in our line, which ultimately led to us being a little bit overrun, and when that cav got in behind us, that was basically game over. I was able to win on my flank, and had we held a little bit more firm at the front, that could have been decisive, but unfortunately with that Arnorian cav, it just wasn't. If we look at my kills, however, my general's bodyguard and my Arnor knights, 452 and 327 apiece, very, very good. The rest of my infantry, did any of it? Well, you know, back down here, sort of the units that I sent over to flank, like the Lasarnak nobles and the Sons of Argonath, 367. So all of my flanking force got a decent amount of kills. My spearmen, none of them broke 100, but you don't really expect them to, because they were just holding the line against much superior units. Shielded Fountain Guard did pretty well as well. The Catapult, 171 kills. I'd say that's a worthwhile return, especially since some of them were Dunedain Knights, but ultimately not enough. Maybe a trebuchet would have been better, but ultimately I wanted to have a few more infantry, which did serve me quite well in the end. But yes, if we look at those kills, ultimately, you know, the men deployed, we had more men, but they got noticeably more kills. Carandol, you know, I do think that he maybe, if he sent over more elite infantry, particularly those Arnor peacekeepers around my flank, I would have had a lot more trouble breaking through that side. But in the end it didn't matter because they were so effective at dealing with the main army. So yes, I hope you enjoyed that map. This will probably be the site of a scenario in the future where the island over there is used a little bit more, and it's sort of a little bit more a little bit more structured, as opposed to the sort of more simplistic line battle and then flanking force that it is here. But still, that was a very fun fight, and it was very close as well, only 3% in it. And in a pitch battle like this, at least a sort of a more choke pointy pitch battle, that's a very, very close margin indeed. So yes, I hope you enjoy Sin's handiwork. Again, Discord, ModDB will be down in the description below, and I hope you enjoyed.